The dignity of African people demands more from us, and as we speak about African unity and Pan-Africanism, we must confront one of the greatest dangers facing the continent today, Afrophobia.
Honorable Ramaphosa is trying to be diplomatic. Where was Mr. President when our people were being brutalized? The envoys he has sent across Africa is late.
We should all accept that the violence is a state-sponsored violence, because the people who are committing all these crimes are accompanied by the police. Thank you very much. I think that we should all accept that the violence is a state-sponsored violence, because the people who are committing all these crimes are accompanied by the police, and the state broadcaster and the mainstream media is giving them unlimited airtime to spread hate and to incite violence. We've seen in many videos where people manhandle other people in the presence of the police, take them from one building to the other in the name of looking for drugs in the presence of the police. And in terms of the law of South Africa, once you handle me like that, if you are not a law enforcement officer, that is manhandling. It can even amount to common assault or even assault itself. And police are duty-bound to intervene and make sure that no civilian act like he is a law enforcement officer if that person is not. We have seen the repeat, at least in the context of South Africa, a repeat of a similar thing, where black-on-black violence was sponsored by the state. It happened in the same areas where these xenophobic attacks are happening. They use the same tribal group to perpetuate hate on each other. The only difference here is that we've not yet seen the trucks carrying weapons to go and give those people to continue killing each other. When a state was confronted with the reality of a democratization of South Africa, when they didn't know how to handle this black resistance, they said blacks must go and attack other black people. And we must not even be tempted to sugarcoat it. It is exactly the repeat. What did the SABC do at that time? It broadcasted those activities the same way it's doing it now, and never censored them, with a hope that it will spread across all over South Africa. We are told that we're supposed to have the best policing in KZN, which is able to nip this thing on the bud, but it's not doing it. If anything, they are running. I was saying to the SG of the EFF, you can go to all the videos of the EFF. When we try to enter any building by force, in less than 2 minutes, they would have used a stun grenade. You have never seen police using stun grenades against these people who are perpetuating hatred amongst Africans. If anything, police are running with them to go and commit other crimes on the other side, instead of saying to them, yes, you have a right to gather, but you are now unruly. And because you are unruly, you are going to have to disperse. No, they don't say that. They encourage them to continue to the next building, to the next this and all of that. So we cannot, you want to use our economic situation to justify a hatred. There's always been a contestation of resources. It has always been like that, but we're able to coexist even when resources have been so limited. Let's take, Sophie, for instance, the language called Fanagalo. It didn't happen now. It happened way before the EFF was formed, with a discovery of diamond and later discovery of gold. The dignity of African people demands more from us, and as we speak about African unity and Pan-Africanism, we must confront one of the greatest dangers facing the continent today, Afrophobia. What some call xenophobia against fellow Africans is in truth Afrophobia, which is the hatred, suspicion, exclusion, and criminalization of African people by fellow Africans themselves. We must also be honest that Afrophobia is not new. and it did not begin in South Africa in 2008 or 2015. It is part of a long colonial strategy designed to divide African people, weaken solidarity, and make unity impossible. Colonialism survived by convincing Africans that they were strangers to one another. The Berlin Conference divided us artificially into Anglophone, Francophones, Lusophones, Arab Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, East Africa, Western Africa, and Southern Africa, not for our benefit, but to fragment African identity and prevent continental unity. From slavery to colonialism, to neocolonialism, to modern financial domination, the pattern has remained the same. Africa is valued for its mineral, labor, land, strategic position, and markets, but African lives themselves are treated as disposable. The world speaks about democracy and human rights, yet throughout history it has repeatedly supported dictatorship, coups, destabilization campaigns, assassinations, and wars whenever African leaders attempted to exercise genuine sovereignty over African wealth. When Patrice Lumumba demanded control over Congolese resources, he was removed and assassinated. When Thomas Sankara sought to free Burkina Faso from dependency and debt, he was isolated and overthrown. When Muammar Gaddafi promoted African financial independence and continental integration, Libya was destroyed under the banner of humanitarian intervention, leaving instability across the Sahel that continues to this day. The destruction of Libya did not only destroy Libya, it destabilized Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, and the border region through weapons, militant activities, trafficking networks, and migration crisis. This is how imperialism functions. One African country is weaponized against another, instability in one region becomes a crisis for neighboring states, and divisions weaken the continental collectively. White supremacy understood very early that a united Africa will become an unstoppable political and economic force, and so division became a weapon. We have seen painfully examples of this throughout modern African history. In 1969, the government of Ghana, under those orders, expelled hundreds of thousands of undocumented migrants, many of them Nigerians and Western Africans who had contributed to the Ghanaian economy. Years later, during economic crisis in the 1980s, Nigeria retaliated by expelling millions of Western African migrants, including large number of Ghanaians. This cycle of retaliation between the two great African nations demonstrated how quickly economic hardship can be manipulated into hostility against fellow Africans. Instead of confronting neo-colonial economic structure and elite failures, ordinary Africans became targets. In Zimbabwe, the Kukurahundi massacre of the 1980s remained one of the most painful chapters in the post-independence African history. Thousands of men in Ndebele civilians were killed during brutal state crackdown in Matabeleland. This tragedy reminds us that ethnic chauvinism and political intolerance can become deadly when power is not guided by democratic accountability and Pan-African humanism. Across Northern Africa, many blacks continue to face racism, exploitation, arbitrary detention, slave trafficking, and violence while migrating through Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and other transit regions. The collapse of Libya after NATO intervention intensified the suffering of black African migrants, many of whom were falsely accused of being mercenaries, imprisoned, tortured, sold into slave markets, or abandoned in inhumane conditions. In recent years, inflammatory rhetoric against sub-Saharan Africans, parts of North Africa, has contributed to attacks, discrimination, and expulsion of vulnerable migrants whose only crime was searching for dignity and survival. And of course, we have witnessed repeated waves of anti-African violence in South Africa itself, where migrants from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Somalia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Malawi, Congo, and elsewhere have been attacked, displaced, looted, and killed. We must say clearly, this violence can never be justified. An unemployed South African and an unemployed Zimbabwean are both victims of the same global system of inequality and exploitation. A Nigerian street trader and a South African worker are not enemies. A Somali shopkeeper and a township resident are not enemies. The true enemy is the system that keeps African people poor while a tiny elite accumulates wealth. Kwame Nkrumah warned us when he said, "The forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keeps us apart." Julius Nyerere also reminds us, without unity, there is no future for Africa. Thomas Sankara taught us that imperialism often occurs in more subtle forms: loan, food, aid, blackmail. Part of that subtle imperialism is teaching Africans to fear one another instead of confronting the structure that exploits all of us collectively. We must also never forget that African liberation itself depended on solidarity across borders. South African freedom fighters found refuge in Zambia, Tanzania, Angola, Mozambique, Algeria, Ethiopia, Libya, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria. Mozambique and Angola suffered destabilization and military attacks because they supported the anti-apartheid struggle. Nigeria funded liberation movements across southern Africa. Tanzania became a home for exiled revolutionaries from across the continent, and Algeria trained liberation fighters from anti-colonial movements throughout Africa. No African country liberated itself entirely alone, and that is why Afrophobia is not only morally wrong, it is historically ignorant. It is a betrayal of liberation struggles, a betrayal of Pan-Africanism, and a betrayal of the spirit of 1963 Addis Ababa. Comrades, we must understand something fundamental. In the global system, Africans only truly have one another. Europe will defend European interests. America will defend American interests. China will defend Chinese interests. Africa must defend African interests. Fellow Africans, the dream of Africa, of a united Africa, is not impossible. It is possible to establish a common African currency in the future. It is possible to build integrated rail and transport system from Cape to Cairo. It is possible to establish African-controlled financial institutions that free us from dependency on the IMF and World Bank. It is possible to create visa-free movement across the continent. It is possible to create universities that lead the world into science and medicine. It is possible to create a borderless Africa like Africa was before the Berlin Conference. What is required is political courage, and the EFF remains committed to the total liberation of Africa, not only from neo-colonial rule, but from economic exploitation, inequality, corruption, tribalism, and dependency. As we commemorate Africa Day, let us remember that history will judge our generation not by the speeches we made, but by whether we transformed material conditions of African people. The task before us is clear: unite Africa, industrialize Africa, democratize Africa, defend Africa, liberate Africa economically. There is no room for anyone who wants to hate Africans. There is no room for black-on-black violence. Africa must stand up and say, we are one, and will never listen to the voice of ignorant people who don't know where we come from. We are who we are because of those who came before us. We are one blood, we are one skin, and we remain the same victims all over the world. Africans are hated in South Africa, Africans are hated in Africa, Africans are hated in the whole global village, and therefore it is now the time for Africans to show one another love, and this mission should be achieved in our lifetime.
Honorable Ramaphosa is trying to be diplomatic. Where was Mr. President when our people were being brutalized? The envoys he has sent across Africa is late. And we believe that these actions must be taken. So, on economic reintegration and resource sovereignty, the sudden evacuation of over 1,000 Ghanaian citizens places an immediate financial and social burden on the state. These individuals have lost their livelihoods, properties, and stability. And our natural resources belong fundamentally to the people of Ghana. By withholding license renewals from foreign entities whose home country actively harms our people, the ministry creates an opportunity to restructure our resource ownership. It is time to look inward, reclaim our strategic setup, and prioritize indigenous ownership and resource sharing structure that can generate revenue to support the long-term economic reintegration of our displaced compatriots. We have other issues, but I'll proceed to read conclusion.
Lieutenant Government.
As the historic vanguard of Pan-African liberty, Ghana has always led by moral and strategic example. However, as our first president, Dr. Nkrumah, rightly noted, true liberation is meaningless without the safety and dignity of the African people. We cannot celebrate Pan-African ideals in corporate boardrooms while our people are brutalized in the street. We expect the Ministry of Land and Natural Resources to exercise its statutory mandate under the Minerals and Mining Act to scrutinize these operations thoroughly and put the security, economic, and sovereign interests of Ghana first. We demand a formal freeze on the renewal of all expired operating extractions and prospecting licenses held by South African entities. Because, of course, if we're a South African company and they have issued a prospecting license, know that you not even do it in the first place. So it's better you have it over. And these are things that we